Right, so when it comes to asking the question of how petulant and pathetic Keir Starmer as an individual might be, you might well be thinking to yourself, well, where do I flipping start? But he's really done it this time to the point even a shameless news channel like Sky News has ripped into him. Because it really does come to something when the Prime Minister of this country chooses to punch down not just on a policy area, but a policy area of increasing concern to more and more people in this country, and punching down on one man in particular at that over it. Starmer singling out one guy in a rancid article written in the Daily Fail, pointing to him as a NIMBY and a zealot, and saying the law doesn't work when individuals like this guy can block planning, block progress, block growth by abusing the law. Abusing the law? Have you looked in the mirror, sunshine? This chap in question, he hasn't abused the law. He simply used it to protect environmental concerns, used the court system as is his right to do. As a former lawyer, of course, Starmer knows all of this. But it is all over concerns Keir Starmer we know doesn't have any of, because he hates tree huggers, as he famously once said. He has no interest in environmental concerns, and now it seems he's prepared to name and shame ordinary members of the public, paint targets on their back in effect, when we as ordinary citizens have no protection or security like he does, and say to others, it's his fault that you can't have stuff built near you that you might want, so blame him, don't blame me. He's prepared to pass the buck in the most petty, small-minded and vindictive way he possibly could, and even the mainstream media isn't letting him get away with it.
So it's not about the government's proposals. That all this week we've seen Keir Starmer roll out a number of things to make it easier to build, potentially, some would say, at the expense of environmental obligations. We'll wait to see some of the detail on that. But something surprised me today, Sophie. It rather shocked me. I'm not easily shocked, as you know. Keir Starmer wrote an article in the Daily Mail in order to talk about his proposals. And, here it is. It's the kind of thing that we see quite a lot. But in this article, over the first 6 paragraphs, he absolutely goes for, roasts and slates an individual former Green Norfolk councillor, a computer scientist, who, sure, has taken a few road schemes to the High Court and is challenging a carbon capture scheme up in Teesside, but zeroes on this one individual. And he talks about their ideological blind spots and the fact that they're doing this with no chance of winning, and they're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it for themselves and not the country, and blames them for wasting taxpayers' money, and just really zero identifying this figure, the names in the paper. And I think I was just surprised that the Prime Minister, a person with big status, big clout, using a major newspaper, should single out a single individual and sort of basically paint a target on their back and going, look, world, he's the problem, when actually it's a massive kind of structural problem, a legal and political problem, and it's much more than about one man. So I talked to Andrew Boswell, the person that the Prime Minister attacked. Here's what he said.
I think it's a very dangerous thing of the Prime Minister to do, and he shouldn't have approached it this way.
Why do you think it's dangerous for Keir Starmer to do this?
Well, he has named me. I'm just an ordinary person, member of the public. I go about my life on that basis. I don't have a vast media team to protect me. I don't have other protections. I mean, actually, it's quite pathetic bullying of the Prime Minister. And actually, he underrates us if he thinks he's actually going to put me off by naming me in public. He completely underrates what the environmental movement is about. It's quite pathetic that he thinks he'll put us off.
That's the individual that Keir Starmer suggested was a NIMBY and a zealot, not backing down, but perhaps rather unbecoming of Keir Starmer?
Right, so that was a clip there from Sky News giving Starmer what was ostensibly a very polite roasting, but nonetheless a roasting, over him targeting an environmental campaigner, Dr. Andrew Boswell, for daring to use the court system in order to protect the environment and campaign on climate change. This chap, having spent the last 20 years of his life campaigning for real climate action based on the science and not what the government of the day thinks sounds good. He's Starmer's idea of a complete nightmare, in effect, an environmentalist who knows the legal system. For example, right now Boswell is crowdfunding £25,000, his stretch target incidentally, to take on the fake net zero venture between BP and Equinor up on Teesside and expose the nonsense of the carbon capture scheme that the government has been rabbiting on about since the technology for carbon capture, of course, as the government keep talking about, doesn't actually exist. And much of what the government wishes to do is at the behest of the lobbying from the gas and oil industry anyway, to keep us using fossil fuels for years to come, thinking we can do so and not continue to cause more environmental damage, or at least that's the way he's trying to sell it to us. If you'd like to flip Starmer the bird and help the environment at the same time by aiding this guy in his legal action here, there's 21 days to go on his crowd justice campaign, Stop This Fake Carbon Capture Project Locking in Fossil Fuels, so do pop over and contribute if you can. But to understand exactly what Starmer has done, he's written a piece in the Daily Mail, because he's never not kissing right-wing media backside, in a piece titled Keir Starmer, My Labour Government Will Stop the Time-Wasting NIMBYs and Zealots from Holding the Country to Ransom. And as Sam Coates in that clip detailed, Starmer spent the first 6 paragraphs of this piece painting a target on Boswell specifically. But equally, this could extend to anyone with an environmental conscience that opposes what Starmer is doing. That this is actually what Starmer thinks of you, what he thinks of your concerns, what his priorities are versus the biggest crisis of our time. Here's an excerpt of it. A former Green Party councillor spent years trying to block vital safety upgrades to the A47. The case reached the Supreme Court last year, which dismissed it for having no logical basis. A top judge even said it had an air of complete unreality. So why was he able to waste years of the court's time and squander tens of millions of pounds of taxpayer money? There are countless more examples of NIMBYs and zealots gumming up the legal system, often for their own ideological blind spots, to stop the government building the infrastructure the country needs. They know they have no chance of winning. They just want to drag it out in hopes that government or industry give up. They want to win for themselves, not for the country. It's like Extinction Rebellion activists who block the motorway at rush hour without a care for the hard-working people going about their lives. An activist group prevented the development of an East Anglia wind farm for over 2 years, robbing people of lower bills and good jobs. And another group delayed the Sizewell C nuclear plant with similar unsuccessful claims. And it is fear of challenge which leads to the ridiculous spectacle of the £100 million bat tunnel for HS2, or the proposal to install an acoustic fish deterrent, 288 underwater speakers designed to scare fish away from Hinkley Point C nuclear power station. I wish I was joking. More than half of all decisions on major infrastructure in this country were taken to court, holding us back and stifling growth. I was the country's chief prosecutor, locking up criminals and keeping the country safe. So I know how important it is that people can access justice when there is a genuine case to be made. But male readers will agree that a small minority should not be able to abuse our legal system to hold the country to ransom. What a prat. There's all manner of things he said there that you can pull apart, so I've only selected a few, because believe me, I could have an absolute field day with it. Legal challenges ensure developments are responsible, though, that they are proportionate for a given area, are actually necessary, and work with the environment rather than cast it aside. You might not agree with the methods some of these protesters that Starmer's rabbited on about use. But Starmer's chief attack was against a guy who works within the law, and if the law finds against Starmer's views, well, he's simply threatening to tear up the law to get his way. More authoritarianism, winding people up, and painting a target on an environmentalist to blame for it all. Starmer mocked the acoustic fish deterrent at Hinkley Point, for example, yet it has become an issue because it is an environmental protection system standard. The EDF are trying to remove to cut costs. Blow to the fish, you might get sucked into the coolant system of a nuclear power plant. Well, I'm sure that can't cause any problems or damage, can it? Local people certainly do not want to see this. They have a right to demand better. The fish have a right to welfare standards. And here is Starmer cheerleading for the developers no matter what. He calls a bat tunnel a ridiculous spectacle, yet so many of our bat species are protected for good reason. And as a local councillor myself, who sits on a planning committee no less, I know that wildlife concerns like this are valid planning issues. Surveys must be carried out in certain circumstances, and the mitigations must be made. They are important. It isn't a valid cost-cutting measure to say stuff the bats or any other of our native species. Development must always be responsible, and Starmer is acting like he would happily tarmac the UK over north to south. Certainly, I don't need to protect or defend Dr. Boswell, though he ably did so himself in that clip by Sky, and he's responded to Starmer's fail in the Mail article with one of his own. In a Guardian piece titled "Activist Hits Back at Starmer for Demonising Him as Green Zealot," and here's an excerpt of that by return. Boswell, a former leader of the Greens on Norfolk County Council, responded by accusing Starmer of trying to put a target on my back, he said. There's a real danger in demonising individuals like this. He added, I don't virtue signal, I'm doing this for my grandchildren. It is Starmer who is virtue signalling to Daily Mail readers and the fossil fuel lobby. Boswell said Starmer's plans to limit legal challenges against infrastructure projects were dangerous for access to justice. He said the debate has to be wider than just locking people out of the planning and justice system. He said Starmer had selectively quoted from his case, which argued that the Department for Transport had failed to properly assess the cumulative impact of the carbon emissions from dualling sections of the A47. Boswell, an environmental consultant who has worked on climate breakdown computer modelling at the University of East Anglia, said at the High Court the judge said I had done a good job showing how badly the environmental impact assessment had been put together and that the case had clarified a lot of issues. And he insisted he was not against infrastructure, pointing to his support for pylons and solar parks, which some activists have opposed. Could all of this just be Keir Starmer taking a swing at the Green Party after all of this? Certainly the shutting down of a climate and nature bill at Parliament to make climate and environmental targets legally binding, a bill pushed by the Lib Dem MP Ros Savage, but being heavily backed by the Greens. Starmer's lot saw the bill fail, saw it fall, Labour MPs being reportedly whipped to not vote for it, and any that did would face expulsion. Not suspension. Starmer was prepared, apparently, to throw MPs out of his party over it, such as his absolute hatred for environmental policy. Growth under Starmer's Labour means building whatever, wherever, and apparently to no standard on environmentalism. Growth means more pollution, therefore. That's the only thing actually growing. More destruction of our countryside, and less ability to oppose it for perfectly valid reasons. The man is as mendacious as he is a menace, caught out having childish tantrums over environmentalists telling him he can't do something, so that he would rather see the law change to oppose those rights instead of protecting them. And certainly we've already seen plenty of signs that Starmer's Britain is increasingly becoming a police state. He already locks up environmental activists and campaigners. He's been just as guilty of overseeing police brutality when it comes to peace protesters too, as last week's Gaza Peace March in London descended into arrests and mistreatment. Check out that story on this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to ensure you don't miss out on new daily content before you do so, however, and help support the channel as you do so, which is enormously appreciated. And I will hopefully, therefore, catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.